Ça va? C'est pas ta trousse qui est sur le groupe? T'as pas perdu ta trousse?
Ah non.
Parce qu'il y a une trousse qui a été retrouvée.
Oui, Nadine m'a dit.
Mais c'était pas la tienne?
Je pense pas. Je vais voir. T'es assis devant la prof.
Oui, je me rends compte de... Tu veux venir là?
Oui. Comme ça, oui, c'est bon. Pardon. T'as fait ton devoir.
Non?
T'as fait ton devoir. T'as fait le tableau avec narration et moi non.
Non.
C'était trop difficile pour moi.
Mais moi, j'étais pas là la semaine dernière.
Oui, c'était trop difficile pour moi. Parce que tu dois distinguer les syllabes dans le nature qu'il y a dans le poème.
Oui.
Mais moi, j'ai pas du tout étudié. Et il y a par exemple un bec. Et il y a plusieurs nature en anglais dans les syllabes. C'est trop compliqué. Moi, par exemple, ici, oui, je sais que par exemple, ici, c'est 4 stanzas.
Oui.
Mais je ne sais pas comment je peux compter les syllabes. Il a dit qu'ici, il y a 6 syllabes. Ici.
Ouais.
Ici, 6 syllabes. 6 syllabes. Lost in an alien. Oui.
Voilà.
Et ici, murmur et broken chain. Quoi? Murmur et broken chain. Ah, okay. I got it.
Once you get it, it's quite easy, I guess.
I think sometimes when you work in the group, you understand much better than yourself.
My feet are still. I guess they're the same.
Oui, c'est 4 stanzas. Et stanza, ça veut dire en français? Strophe, c'est comme paragraphe. Et aussi, dans le poème, on doit analyser les structures, narration et différentes auteurs. Et aussi les structures et les mots, tu dis qu'est-ce qui se passe, qu'est-ce que c'est le mot.
Ici, je crois que le narrateur est le même que The Judith Tribe, right?
Oui, elle a dit que
Là, c'est le
a
même.
virgin is gone, nature left. A virgin is gone, the settler left. A virgin, en tout cas, les aborigènes gone, but the nature left and the settler left.
Stay.
The settler,
Yes.
the white man.
Yeah, you can see it here as well. If you read this one, so in this one you can see like the songs and stuff. These are the aborigines that left because they said they're no more and no one is more. It's like the past disappeared, but this is more complicated.
C'est combien de stanzas?
No,
C'est 5.
But this is more complicated. This one is easier.
Moi j'ai trouvé quelque chose, je te montre.
Oui. Mais apparemment, le professeur, pourtant, c'est la personne. No. Oh, you found it. You found it.
Oh no, it's mine.
Yeah, but yesterday someone was walking around and doing with your.
Really?
Yeah? No?
You see, I wasn't in architecture.
Hi everyone. Welcome to today's class. Prepare a sheet. Very nice.
Oui, des gens me disent, moi c'est complètement, mais...
Alright, so today we are going to continue our work on Judith Wright's poems. Alright, okay. And I asked you at home to do two things. The first one was to read this essay, sorry, the meaning of the word sacred. The other one was to ask you to finish the analysis of Bora Ring. So I just wanted to say a couple of words about this essay. I don't think there was anything particularly difficult to understand about it. Don't hesitate if you have any questions. But obviously you can see that the essay basically addresses the very different approaches to the land that you can find from a settler point of view and from an Aboriginal point of view. In particular, she tries to insist on the fact that the Aboriginal point of view is very much based on respecting the environment and the long term as opposed to the exploitative capitalist approach to the land that existed in the settlers. Now this sounds very obvious today. Again, you have to project yourself back to the time when Wright was writing. In particular, the poem that we're studying, Bora Ring, is nothing too original today. When it was published in 1946, it was actually quite transgressive to actually write in that way for someone who came from a white settler tradition. And so make sure when you read Wright that you actually locate what she says in her context. You can see that there's also a very clear admission by Wright in this that the land does belong to Aboriginal people. Again, you have to consider that this was something that was not necessarily present at the time. Okay, so you can see that this is actually an essay that comes quite late in her career, but Wright was one of the first public figures to really assert this with quite a lot of strength. Okay, so make sure that you keep that in mind. Right, and of course, her argument in this is that the land should be considered sacred. So this is something that you can use when you analyze her poems. Taking this spiritual, sacred dimension. You can see in Bora Ring, we've only looked at just the one, that she's really trying to connect with that spiritual dimension, with how Aboriginal people have this specific connection to the land and how she tries to understand that. Do you guys have any questions about this essay? Anything that you found difficult, references, or? I imagine it's not too difficult. So you can see in particular this section here, because Wright is opposing the visions of the settlers and the visions of Aborigines. What she's also saying is that their fates are bound, okay? That basically today they are connected and that there's a need to go towards Aboriginal people to understand their culture. You can see here this too. This is what really lies at the deepest roots of their loss and of our loss too. We not only don't see the country, but we can't see it. It is not ours except in the shallowest and most imposed sense. We've claimed it, but claimed it under imported laws, far more recent and far less wise than the Aboriginal law, which long protected and held it sacred. Okay, so you can see a lot of these tensions that exist there, and her, in a way, what she's trying to do is to reconcile those oppositions in her work. All right, so we are going to continue discussing our first poem, last week we talked about the plot, we talked about the structure of the extract, and I asked you to look individually at each line in the table. I know it's a bit linear, but the idea is for us to analyze one poem 100%, so you guys see the type of work that you're supposed to do if you have a commentary on a poem. So, the third point that we're supposed to work on is narrative technique and vocalization. Did you guys write anything special about this? Well, actually, on va faire ça de manière un peu moins linéaire. What did you guys write in any line? Because otherwise it's going to be a bit linear, isn't it? Tell me, what are some of the things that you noticed at home about the poem that we didn't mention? Last week we talked about rhythm, we talked about rhymes, we talked about the structure. What did you guys notice beside that?
Sorry, I wasn't here last week, but I noticed that there's a lot of S songs. I don't know if you already mentioned it. Sounds, yes, a lot of S sounds, especially in the first stanza.
Okay. How do you analyze it?
It's I don't know. It sounds like I don't know if it sounds maybe a bit silly, but the wind in very empty spaces. I think it sounds like this. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So something is gone, you know. And she used a lot of words like gone, lost, broken, gone. Well, she wants to say that what was the core of the land is gone now because of settlers. So there is sort of emptiness that I think is reflected in the S sound.
Okay, all right. I can accept that. As I said 2 weeks ago, every time you find something in the text, you need to try to provide an interpretation for it. This interpretation can be double, triple. You can say, well, it can evoke this or that or that. You don't have to be definitive or say that it necessarily does this, but you have to try to propose an interpretation. Okay, just seeing a metaphor, seeing an alliteration, as is the case here, you actually need to try to say what it actually does. All right? Okay. What else did you guys notice about this poem? What are some of the things that you wrote down?
In the last stanza, there is an enchantment when it says bring the writer's heart out to represent the acting of the heart of the settler.
Sorry, I couldn't hear half of what you said. Can you repeat?
There's an enchantment to represent the acting of the heart of the settler in the last stanza.
Okay, the enjambment. Okay, all right, yep. That's an interesting point here. You've got the enjambment here that basically represents, I guess, physically in the form of the poem, that halting of the heart. Okay, so you've got here, of course, you can connect this argument to the connection, well, to the correspondence between form and content. Okay, you've got the idea of halting, and this is reflected in the very form of the poem and how she chose to write it. Okay, that works. What else did you find? You can close the blinds if you need to, or draw the curtains. Everybody?
There's on verse 5, the personification of nature, with the words stand up for the grass, and maybe the author, well, the poet, made this choice to glorify nature and give like a consciousness to it.
Okay. Alright, yeah. I agree with what you say. We do have moments where nature is personified. This is a good example here. Only the grass stands up. As you said, this gives some form of presence to nature. It's not just nature. There's a sense of, I don't know how you want to formulate it, but presence or consciousness, as you said, to nature, you can compare it with the first stanza. In the first stanza, you've got the idea of the dances that were present on the earth, and then you have the idea that only the grass stands up. So you basically have a replacement in the second stanza. You used to have dancers, now only the grass stands up. These are the only figures. So it's a way to mark the loss, to show the loss that is there. But there's also a sense in the poem, I'm sure you saw this, that Aboriginal past still exists through nature. That in a way nature is a witness to what happened before and shows what is actually missing. So you can include it in this. Still, as part of the personification, we've got this whole stanza that actually works as a personification. You guys might have noticed this, but obviously the apple gums, these are trees. Their posture and mime are past corroboree. You've got the idea that they're murmuring a broken chant. So, you know, this personification of nature needs to be addressed. Alright, what else did you find? Just 3 things. It's not going to be anywhere. What did you make of the final? How do you understand the final stanza? What's the reference to Cain? Who's Cain? Yeah. Yes. It is a reference to the Bible. What is it a reference to in the Bible? What is Cain a symbol of in the Bible? Yeah, is it a symbol of treason? Yeah, he's basically the first murderer in mankind. Okay, so he's the symbol, as you said, of betrayal, but in particular, he's very symbolically the first murderer in the Bible. Okay, and he's cursed because of that. You've got a double curse on Cain. I don't want to say anything stupid, but you've got a double punishment. The first one is that the earth is going to be cursed. That is, if Cain tries to farm the land is going to be barren. The land is going to be sterile and not actually yield any produce for him. And the other thing is that Cain is, of course, condemned to being a wanderer, to being a fugitive. Okay, so you do have this idea. This is, of course, something that is very symbolic. Here, the fact that the settler figure is actually represented as being a murderous figure. Thank you. Is actually being represented as a murderer, and the idea that you've got this curse that is on the settlers. Okay, so you can see that there's a use of a biblical reference to really bring a very dramatic dimension to this. Okay, before it's sort of mourning the absence of Aborigines, and then you've got the hint through the Cain reference that it's actually the fault of the settlers that this has actually taken place. Okay, so you've got a clear blaming by right in this, a clear responsibility that is put on settlers for this absence. Okay, it's not just the disappearance of Aborigines. Sorry, do you need this drawn? Well done. Alright, I think everyone's safe now. Okay. What else did you notice? I'm sure you've got other things that you noticed in this. Que d'énergie. Je vous comprends, moi-même, je me bats. Alright, so let's do this in a clever way. You really, really need to go into a lot of detail to work on the poems. You remember what we talked about in the structure last week? This is what you need to do for every single point. Okay, so seeing a metaphor here and there, that's good, but that's really basic analysis. You really need to try to think about all of the poem. So if we have a look a little bit at this, you can see that in the narration we've got a narration, that is potentially external. Well, comment dire? Okay. Basically, in this narration, you can see that you've got a narrator that is unspecified. Okay, you don't really know who this is. There's no first-person narration, so you can't actually consider that there's a very real narrator that is present there. As I mentioned last week, you can't consider that this is Wright speaking directly. We're in a fictional representation. Yes, her voice is somewhere behind, but it's not her speaking directly in that poem. So you have to consider that she creates a narrative situation. She chooses to create a fiction where she basically opposes Aboriginal absence and the presence of settlers. Okay, so it's really important for you guys to consider this. Of course, the narrator that we don't know much about in this knows quite a lot. The narrator knows about what used to exist, what only exists now. The narrator knows about the fear in the heart of the writer. So we do have a sense of omniscience in the narrator. Which is why, in this sense, you can't really say that this is writing. You've got a narrator that actually elaborates or imagines at least the feelings of the writer and what used to exist. This section on the themes can be quite useful, in particular, to help you work on your plan. In particular, in this poem, you can see that there are two major themes that are there: nature, Aborigines. That's pretty obvious. But what is interesting about the themes is trying to see if they connect or if they're opposed. And I'm sure you all noticed that there are very clear connections that are made between nature and Aborigines. They're completely inseparable in this poem. So you can connect this to what you read in the essay, the meaning of the word sacred, the deep spiritual connection of Aborigines to the land. This idea that even though the Aborigines have gone, the trees keep murmuring their chant. The trees keep miming and posturing their dances. The grass basically reproduces Aboriginal presence. Okay, so it's an important point to analyze in this, that you've got this very strong, inseparable connection between Aborigines and nature. And it's this bond in particular that is problematic to settlers, because nature itself is a reminder of the disappearance of Aboriginal people. That is, that in that poem, you've got the idea that the very existence of nature, the very trees, the very grass, remind you of Aboriginal presence. Therefore, anything you do in Australia reminds you of that presence. Okay? It's not a nature that is rid of Aboriginal people. It's a nature that constantly reminds you through the smallest signs of Aboriginal presence. You can also see that Aborigines are only represented in very minimalist terms. How are Aborigines represented? This is something we can talk about in characterization as well. Okay, it works as well in there. What are some of the keywords that we associate with Aborigines in the poem? Yep. So we've got dance with the corroboree as well.
Painted bodies.
Yeah, painted bodies. So this would be connected to traditional ceremonies.
The nomad fee.
Yeah.
It's like the way of life is gone.
Yeah.
Their way of life.
So the nomad dimension of Aboriginal life. What can you say about this? What strikes you about this?
They're not directly mentioned.
Yeah?
Well, but settlers are not mentioned, are they?
You've got the rider.
Yeah, the rider. Yes, yes.
But they're mostly evoked through traditional activities. Okay, so they're summed up as their activities. they're summed up as their presence on the land. Okay, so nomad feet, the traditional dances, the hunting, we've got the spear. Okay, so this is all traditional activities. If I ask you guys to write a poem about Aboriginal people, I don't know, maybe you might want to have a name, to have a family, to have a face, to talk about other forms of activity. Here you've got a very deliberate decision to limit the representation of Aboriginal people to traditional ceremonies. So basically what she's doing is emphasizing the connection to the land. Okay? And it's what allows her to say there's an uneasiness in settlers when they see the land. Even though there are no Aborigines, the connection between the two was so deep that settlers are necessarily uneasy when they're in the landscape. Do you see what I mean? This is constructed in the poem, and this is what you have to try to break down if you need to analyze it. All right, and of course, you can see as well that there's a very clear shift. You know that we've got 4 stanzas, une petite craie. You remember that the first 3 are about Aborigines. So you've got gone, what stays, gone, what stays, and only 1 stanza is on the settler. So you can first consider that this is you've got much more space given to Aboriginal people in the poem than you've got space given to settlers, but settlers are there at the end. Okay, so there's a very symbolic dimension to this. These sections are very sort of tragic, sad, mourning. Okay, so you can comment on the tone of this. On est d'accord qu'on n'a pas un point de vue d'observation objectif, d'accord? Vous avez une espèce de mélancolie qui est dans ces paragraphes-là. But what you can say is that there's a very positive representation of those traditional activities. So hunting, the chants, etc. There's an assumption in the poem that this is all happy. And then you've got the settlers that are only represented through fear and the connection to murder. Okay? So you can also oppose this. There's a very clearly differentiated representation of Aborigines. Happy dances, happy hunting, oh no, it's so sad they've gone, and then evil settlers. Si je simplifie un petit peu. Hein? But basically you can try to show this, and how this is also reflected in the structure of the poem. So if we move to characters and characterization, we've talked about the fact that the representation of Aborigines is very partial. It's very fragmented. La première année où j'ai enseigné ce poème, moi dans ma tête j'ai lu ça, j'ai vu Hunter, Nomad. Dans ma tête, en connaissant le contexte australien, c'était 100% clair que c'était des aborigènes. J'ai vu Rider, dans ma tête c'était 100% clair que c'était des settlers. C'est-à-dire que quand on connaît le contexte australien, il n'y a aucun doute là-dessus. Ce dont je ne m'étais pas rendu compte, c'est que pour mes étudiants, c'était pas forcément très clair. Pour eux, il y avait quelqu'un qui chassait, ça voulait pas forcément dire que c'était un aborigène, et puis il y a quelqu'un sur un cheval, ça voulait pas forcément dire que c'était un settler. Il faut voir que dans le contexte australien, vous avez vraiment dans n'importe quel contexte, vous avez des mots qui évoquent directement des choses. D'accord? En France, c'est pareil, vous allez dire fraternité, ça évoque un truc énorme. Donc là, c'est pareil, vous avez des images très fragmentées, d'accord? Juste des toutes petites évocations, et on sait que c'est les aborigènes parce qu'il y a les chants, il y a la danse, il y a le corroboree, il y a le fait de chasser. Et puis ensuite, vous avez les settlers qui sont évoqués à travers principalement the rider. D'accord? Donc, you can basically comment on this. The fact that this is very partial, okay? It is quite difficult for someone who's not familiar with the context to understand it. And this is a conscious decision on the part of Wright to keep this very evocative, very elusive. You can say that the lack of clarity in the characterization of Aboriginal characters is there for a number of reasons. We can say that it's there because there is partial knowledge of their culture, because at the time when Wright was born and grew up in the countryside, there were very few Aboriginal people still around. So this can reflect the very limited knowledge that settlers have of Aboriginal people. But you can also see that this allows her to focus, to zoom in on certain specificities, so traditional life and how this has been broken down. In particular, this is quite easy to see in connection to the settler figure. The fact that the settler is only characterized by fear and murder, that's pretty much what you have. This forces you to interpret it that way. Vous voyez ce que je veux dire? Si je mets un prénom, si je mets une histoire, si je mets une famille, si je mets une narration, etc., un contexte narratif, d'où il vient, où il va, ici j'ai deux choses qui me permettent de comprendre ce personnage-là. Ces deux choses, c'est la peur et c'est la relation au meurtre avec la référence à Cain. Ce qui veut dire que vous, ça vous oblige en tant que lecteur de l'interpréter de cette manière-là. D'accord? La caractérisation partielle, elle fait partie de ça. The other thing you might have noticed is that you've got the song is gone, the hunter is gone, and the rider's heart. You've got the singular here that is used. What does that create for you guys? Why do I have several riders? Why do I have just the one song? Why do I have just the one hunter in this poem? If you turn it into the plural, what does it change?
It is very generic. I mean, she talks she talks about groups of people. She doesn't make individuals important. I mean, it's very Manichaean, I would say
Manichaean.
Manichaean way of seeing things in history, I guess.
Yeah, definitely you've got a very binary way of looking at things. This is also in the structure, as you said. The singular, you really have to wonder why she chose the singular, because we're talking about entire groups. Okay, she's opposing social groups, but what she's doing is that she's doing that by using the singular. So it's up to you guys to see how you want to interpret it. But obviously, what it is necessarily creating is creating a symbolic figure, an emblematic figure. Okay, so you've got the one character opposed to the one character. It's dealt with in very symbolic, very generic, very generalizing terms. D'accord? Tout ça, c'est à vous de le déconstruire, de montrer que elle est vraiment, quelque part, ici, on est dans une représentation très très schématique. D'accord? Vous avez les aborigènes, ah, ils dansaient, c'est bien, ils ont disparu. Et vous avez les settlers, ah, c'est pas bien, c'est des meurtriers. C'est particulièrement binaire, c'est à vous de montrer comment c'est fait, c'est à vous de montrer aussi que c'est ça qui génère un petit peu les émotions et le ton très tragique du poème. D'accord? C'est le fait de créer ces entités. So for the tone, obviously you can say that it's tragic, mourning, anything that you want. For the space and locations, again, things are very vague. We just know we're in nature. We're somewhere in the bush, and somewhere in the bush there are traces of the loss of Aboriginal people, and there's a rider. That's it. Again, you need to comment on this. Okay? If you've got a lack of locations, you need to consider why this is there. In terms of time, I guess we can connect this to the structure of Bora Ring. You can see that you've got 3 stanzas that are dedicated to Aboriginal people and their loss. So the long time of Aboriginal presence and Aboriginal loss, as opposed to the very short time of settler presence. This is there in the very structure of the poem. So in figures of speech and rhetoric and in style and language, because sometimes it's a bit difficult to separate them, you can mention lots of things. We've talked about alliterations in the poem. You can also mention some of the oppositions, some of the juxtapositions that are a bit striking in the poem. In particular, you can see a sightless shadow, an unsaid word. Okay, you have all of these that are a little bit contradictory. I wouldn't say they're oxymorons. But they're basically strange juxtapositions that show some of the conflict that exists in the writer's heart. You can also argue, if we go further into analysis, that basically Aborigines are only represented through, well, they're only referred to through metonymies. What's a metonymy? Pauline? Yeah, okay. It's technically that's a synecdoche. Technically that's a synecdoche. A synecdoche is part of metonymies. If you want, it's a sub-form of metonymy. So synecdoche is using a part of something or someone to refer to the whole. A metonymy includes this, but also includes basically using something connected to something that can be a part of it, that can be associated with it to refer to it. Okay, so for instance, you know, referring to a ship by calling it a sail, okay, with the main sail, that's a synecdoche. Très franchement, la différence entre synecdoque et des métonymies, des fois, elle est compliquée à maîtriser. Moi, je vous propose de n'utiliser que le terme métonymie, car toutes les synecdoques sont des métonymies, mais toutes les métonymies ne sont pas des synecdoques. Donc c'est plus simple pour vous. But basically, you can see that Aborigines are represented through the song, the dances, the rituals. Okay, so this is metonymy used to evoke Aborigines. This is why it was difficult for students to basically understand this, because you've got these, you know, really limited references that are there to evoke Aborigines. Ça va? This is how detailed your work on a poem should be. Okay? Taking the table, ça c'est la première étape, c'est le repérage. Et ensuite, à partir de ce que vous avez trouvé, vous pouvez réfléchir à un plan. D'accord? En soi, ça vous permet juste d'être exhaustif dans ce que vous allez chercher. Mais c'est vraiment important, vous voyez bien que ce poème, on le lit, on le comprend facilement, il n'y a pas de souci, on ressent assez facilement le ton tragique, etc. Mais il faut arriver à formuler, c'est tout le but de l'analyse littéraire, comment c'est créé dans le texte. D'accord? Qu'est-ce qui est dans le texte? Oh, les pipelettes. Yona, I can't hear you, but I can see you. Vous savez, si vous voulez parler tranquille, il faut venir ici. C'est les personnes qu'on ne voit pas ici. So, yes, make sure that you spend a lot of time deconstructing. Start with your emotions, okay? Read the poem. When you read this poem, you're like, it's a bit weird, lots of things that have disappeared. This final figure is really not really nice. Check where this is created, how it's generated through the text. Alright? Okay, so we are going to study, where am I? Two other poems today. Obviously we're not going to study all poems in that much detail because we don't have enough time, and obviously I don't want to tell you everything. I want you guys at the exam to be able to study things. So obviously if you get a commentary, you're not going to get Bora Ring, okay? Because then this is just asking you to remember what we did together, and that's not the point. So what I'd like to work on, there's this poem here that we'll just work on rather quickly together, and then we'll do another detailed analysis of another poem so we get some practice. So we'll start with this one, Australia, 1970. As you can see, it's quite short. C'est pas là. Je suis perdue dans les feuilles. As you can see, it's quite short. So basically, have a read. Try to clarify the meaning of the poem. Try to identify the major images that are used. And then consider how this compares with Bora Ring. Hey, do you have different techniques? Do you have a different something that's generated in it or not? Okay? So, 10 minutes to do this? Yeah? We'll see if you've had the time.
What are your thoughts on this?
what did you write down regarding major images and what you thought about Borrowing, or maybe the message of the poem? What are some of the things you noticed? Please?
She introduced teams.
Yeah, okay. Like, sorry?
Wild country.
Okay. But she's evoking the country. Where do you think that is an autonomy?
I think influencing Aborigines.
Okay. Why would this be about Aborigines?
Because society in Australia.
Okay. What do you guys think? Do you guys see references to Aborigines in this or not?
Not directly.
Okay. So someone says not directly. Cédric?
I think that is almost the same way of doing that in Borrowing. It's using using nature and animal comparison. They use animal and nature words to talk about both Aborigines and settlers this time, I think. It's like an opposition, and the narrator is omniscient and is watching this opposition. I thought that it was in between a wish or prediction of what is either see or wish to see. The settlers Australia collapsing, and at the same time we can see like the settlers are blaming the Aborigines for the country's death, but at the same time you can see that it's also it's because the settlers did what they did to the Aborigines that the Aborigines are like dooming the settlers.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
Okay. I'm a little bit puzzled by the fact that you guys think there are references to Aborigines.
No.
I don't see any references to Aboriginal people.
The,
In this. But, prove me wrong. I'm happy to change my reading.
there are no direct references to Aborigines, but she's talking about the country, but the Aborigines country, the original Australia, which is dying.
Okay.
So the reference to Aborigines is very indirect. It's the Aboriginal Australia that is dying.
Okay.
You know what I mean? She compares it to different animals, and so you have the same link with nature as Borrowing, but she's going one step further here. Well, we are in 1971, so she's much older now. She's talking about the death of Australia, but the original Australia, killed by the actual 1971 Australia.
Yeah. Okay. What it says, to me, there are no references to Aboriginal people. This is a poem about nature. If you want, it's a poem about ecology and the environment being destroyed. Of course, if you want to over-interpret, yes, there are Aboriginal people that live in that environment. But make sure that you don't get too excited about seeing references to Aboriginal people. I think this is very, we talked about the fact that there are lots of different poems, wrote about lots of different things. And here, in Borrowing, it's the hunter, the corroboree, the chance. You've got lots of references that really push you to know for sure that she's talking about Aboriginal people. Here, of course, she's talking about the fact that the landscape and the country is being destroyed. You can consider that in country, she refers just to nature, or she refers more globally to Australia as a whole being destroyed. But I don't really see anything that specifically refers to Aboriginal people. Even though, you know, as you said, when you speak about Australia, this is of course what you imply. But I think here she takes a more global perspective. In Borrowing, she's really into Aboriginal settler relations, and here she's more interested into the destruction, what she sees as the destruction of the country as a whole, if you want. But, you know, if you find words or references that you find evoke Aboriginal people, that's not a problem, we can discuss them. But honestly, I think that's more about nature and the country as a whole than it is specifically about Aboriginal dispossession. You would have clues, you would have references to spears or to Aborigines or to things like that. I know her poetry is quite elusive, so it's part of the difficulty of reading it. Alright, but you know, if we take aside some of the oppositions that you guys mentioned between settlers and Aborigines, everything that you said works quite well, you know, about the destruction of the landscape. She's basically, we've got a narrator that's basically watching or predicting or willing a destruction on the landscape, wanting this to be destroyed, basically. What else did you guys find or notice about this poem? Maybe you wrote down things about images or other?
There's the same idea that settlers are murderers as in Borrowing.
The same idea that what?
Settlers are murderers.
Murderers, ok, sorry. Tant que ça arrive jusqu'ici, hop là, c'est bon. Okay, yeah, definitely. Even though, yes, yeah, okay, so we can see this, where do you find this idea of murder and specifically in the text? Is there one space?
On line 8, she says the killer referring to the I think.
Okay, alright. As you said, there is definitely this idea of destruction, at least if you don't want to speak about murder. Obviously we're speaking here about destroying the land, but there's a very destructive dimension to what she mentions. To the characters. Yes, to the characters, to the groups that are being evoked. What else did you guys find or compare?
She's present this time. She sort of takes the blame for her culture, society, I guess. In the 4th stanza, so we corrupt you with our torturing mind, and then in the rest of the poem, she in the last stanza, she used the I, and so yeah, she is present here. She's the narrator now.
You can't. Judith Wright as a person can never be the narrator. She's projecting a persona that looks like her, but that is a limited her. But yes, we do have a first person or first person plural or first person singular narrator in this. You've got the use of the word I, we've got we. You can of course analyze this, the fact that she's addressing the countryside. She's actually, you know, it sounds like in Greek poetry when you've got an evocation of the muse, usually when people are addressing directly the muse in a poem, that's what you have at the beginning of each Greek tragedy. So here you've got a direct address to the land. The land is actually being addressed directly as, you know, if you can consider this to be a personification of the land since you can address it. So you can definitely comment in terms of narration and vocalization. You've got a very different approach in Borrowing in this, definitely. What else did you find? Did it?
There is this notion that settlers and the country are bounded.
Yep.
In the last line, she said, the person says that we are ruined by having the kill. It means that they can't live without one another. The settlers are paying for what they did to the country.
Yeah, definitely you do have this connection. As you can see, it's very different from the connection that she draws between Aborigines and the land in Borrowing. That's a very spiritual, sacred, so almost, I I'm not sure how to say this, but almost a very, yes, full fusion between Aborigines and nature, as opposed to here where you can see that there's a connection in the sense that they have a common fate. If you destroy the land is going to destroy you in return. So this is what she's arguing. Again, you know, we're talking about 1970. This is something we hear about every single day on the radio. At the moment, you know, we've got an environmental discourse that's immensely present. That wasn't in the 1970s. Okay, that was much less present. We do have this idea that their fates are connected, and that there needs to be a change, basically, in this. What's her technique? Obviously, I'm sure you can all understand that here she's saying we're destroying the land, we need to stop. This is not how she's formulating it. She's actually using irony and bitterness. Of course, she says die wild country, but she doesn't want the country to die. Okay, so you can see that there's a very ironic dimension to what she says. You know that irony is when you mean the opposite of what you say. Obviously, she doesn't want, you know, nature, etc., to die. There's no desire for this. What she wants is to provoke you into reacting to this by willing this destruction. Okay, so saying this is the path we're going down into, and therefore that's the stance she's taking on it, to present you with an ironic presentation of things. D'accord? Elle aurait pu se formuler son poème genre oh, c'est affreux, on détruit la nature, il faut faire quelque chose. Non, ce qu'elle fait à la place, c'est vas-y, crève. D'accord? Meurs, la terre, etc. À cause de tout ce qu'on a fait, vas-y, meurs et venge-toi. Donc ça, ici, il faut l'analyser, ce choix-là. Pourquoi est-ce qu'elle choisit d'avoir quelque chose qui est aussi... Enfin, c'est un peu basé sur la confrontation. D'accord? C'est pas la même chose que de faire un poème moralisateur en disant il faudrait faire ça, c'est important, la nature, machin. You have to think about what this creates. What does that generate for you guys? Her telling the country to die? How does that change from, you know, a nice little moralizing poem about taking care of the land? Changes nothing. If you imagine the same poem written as a list of recommendations and as what we should do, and if you take this poem, what's the change? What does she generate in readers that she wouldn't have generated with another tone? Yep, okay, potentially fear. Yep.
Might be encouraged to kind of slowing down this description process by saying that yes, die nature, maybe this is made for us to realize what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's probably a way to provoke the reader into realizing this, that this is the path that you're taking, not in a much more, you know, in an inverted way, in a way what she wishes for is what she wants you to react against. So you do have this idea there. Okay, so do try to consider the choices that are made here. This is quite, you know, it's taking the opposite of what she basically wants. To actually encourage nature to die. Alright. What do you make of this? I'm sure you all noticed that there are comparisons. Nature is compared to an eagle hawk, to a tiger snake, one of the most venomous snakes in the world, and then you've got the soldier ant. Okay, so this is an ant, a specific type of ant. What do you make of this? This is something you can analyze. Why do you think she picked those? Why do you think she goes from one to the next to the next?
Maybe because they were endangered.
Okay. Not my problem if the tiger snake dies out. I wouldn't be too unhappy. Okay, I'm not sure there was anything done to save the soldier ant, but yes, maybe, I guess for the eagle hawk, you can say that yes, this is more of a noble sort of animal. C'est quoi la progression? You start with the eagle hawk, you go to a snake, you go to an ant. And why do you have that choice of animal? You really, you know, she could have compared it to koala. It wouldn't have made much the same impression. Okay, there are clear choices here. Yeah.
The test from an animal that is basically living in the sky, to an animal that is living on the ground, to an animal that is living inside the ground.
Yep.
So there is a kind of description to every level of nature as presented in Austria.
Yep. Yep, definitely. As you said, you go pretty much from the sky to the ground to under the ground. You also have a progression in terms of size. You start with the eagle hawk, you go to a snake, you go to an insect. You also cover 3 different types of living animals. You've got birds, you've got reptiles, and then you've got insects. Okay, so it's not the same thing as using just snakes or just mammals or just birds. So you can see that you've got that, and of course in terms of size and zooming in, you go from the wide territory of the eagle hawk to the very small, very detailed territory of the ants. Okay, so in a way, you can interpret this in lots of different ways, but the truth is, she didn't choose the emu, she didn't choose the kangaroo, she didn't choose fish, she didn't choose the kookaburra or anything else. Okay, you have to wonder about that choice. Why the eagle hawk, why the tiger snake, and why the soldier ant? You can also consider the fact that here she uses the tiger snake. Obviously it's an immensely dangerous snake. Run if you see one, or don't, but avoid it. So basically you can see that she also chose animals that are dangerous, animals that have some form of power, showing that nature has the potential, has the strength to destroy in return. Okay, so she's not evoking cute little platypus to basically show you this. There's a definite choice here. And of course, you can also consider that she basically zooms in, so she considers destruction at a large scale, all the way down to the smallest detail that the soldier ant could actually destroy. Okay, so up to you to see how you want to analyze it, but do remember to try to analyze these. What are the images that are chosen? Why are they chosen? What's the order? What's the progression? And there are lots of different answers. Maybe you guys read it in a different way than what we've just talked about. But consider and try to analyze why you have this. So, any questions about this poem? Anything that you need clarification on? Well, I propose we take a short break.
C'est quoi ici? Put dans le... Parce que dans c'est estanga. Mais dans l'estanga, il y a syllabel, et syllabel is based on foot. It's based on the meter.
The number of meters.
The number of meters. Mais j'ai pas compris c'est quoi meter. C'est hier soir, j'ai pas bien dormi parce que j'ai cherché meter, c'est l'euro, quelque chose comme ça. Oui, j'ai pas compris pas du tout. Ici, the division of 4 or more lines, a fixed length, meter, or rhythm scale. Does it look similar to paragraph in prose? is remembering the number of feet in each line. In each line.
Yeah, because here you have, you see, die while country, like the walk. Okay.
Rhythms. Par exemple, ici, we have kinds of stanza. Couplet, ça veut dire ici. Two rhyming. Two set, 3 lines. Catherine.
Yeah.
4 C'était un peu intéressant pour moi parce que 4 ans, is a formal stanza provide the pressure with Omar Khayyam, c'est trop célèbre.
Ah oui?
Ouais. Parce qu'il y a 4 verses. Et oui, c'est comme ça. Ouais. Et ici, 5 lines, something. Et aussi, ici, c'est méta. Oui, foot. The basic unit of measurement of the accentual syllable meter. Tu sais que syllable, par exemple.
But it's just the accent, les syllabes accentuées.
Il y a accentué et non accentué.
Et accentué, c'est les... Non, le foot, c'est une syllabe accentuée.
En foot, c'est accentué.
Donc tu l'entends en fait, ça rythme la phrase.
Mais il n'y a pas non accentué dans le foot.
Bah non, parce que si par exemple là, on reprend borrowing, on avait the song is gone, the dance.
The song is gone, the dance.
Yeah, no.
The song is gone,
the dance. 7? 6? Oh, 6.
Comment?
6 foot. The song is gone, the dance.
The song is gone, the dance is
6 foot. So this is 6 feet.
6 feet.
Okay, so that's a 6 feet.
Parce que ils sont les accentués.
Yeah. Is secret with the dancers in the earth. So this is 10.
Is secret with the dancers in the earth. 10.
So 10. So 6, 10, 10, 6.
6, 10,
10, 6. Lost in an Argentina. Yeah, 6, 10, 10, 6. So that's I think that's the meter, right?
Meter is a unit of rhyme in poetry.
It's the pattern of beats. A foot. Yeah, I think.
It's called a foot.
Again? I don't know. Anyway, I hate poetry. I don't like poetry, you know.
Each foot has a certain number of syllables. A certain number of syllables in it. Usually 2 or 3 syllables. Foot. Usually 2 or 3 syllables.
I don't know. I need to double check that.
Ouais.
This afternoon, you know, before the didactique,
Moi, je pense qu'on a des dialectes courts que je n'ai pas participé.
Didactique. Oui, on a 3 heures de didactique.
Ouais.
Moi, je ne veux pas venir à la première.
Préparation.
Non, parce que tu sais, elle devait ajouter 1 heure pour rattraper l'heure qu'elle a ratée aussi.
On a jusqu'à quoi? À quelle heure?
Non, on a les 2 heures normales, 14, 16, et on a 1 heure en plus avant, donc on a de 13 à... Non, 13, 16.
13, 16. Ouais.
13, 16, on a didactique. Elle va nous rendre le devoir, normalement.
Comment?
Elle va nous rendre le devoir
Ok.
qu'on a fait avant les vacances.
Mais quel était le devoir? Je sais pas.
Si, le contrôle continu.
Aujourd'hui?
Non, elle va nous rendre
Ah oui.
celui qu'on a fait avant les vacances.
Oui, je pensais qu'aujourd'hui, on a l'examen. L'examen, c'est la semaine prochaine.
C'est la semaine prochaine?
Oui, c'est la semaine prochaine. Ouais.
Mais là, elle va nous donner celui de la semaine dernière.
Ouais.
T'es sûr que c'est la semaine prochaine?
Oui, c'est la semaine prochaine.
Déjà?
Oui, encore.
Parce que mais elle a
Oui,
même
c'est
pas.
le 14 novembre. Aujourd'hui, c'est 7. Oui, on est.
Et ça fait tout, non? Where is this? Ah, c'est là. Oui. Elle a dit contrôle continu 1, 17 octobre. 14 novembre.
Ouais. Je pense qu'on a encore.
Oui, à le 12 décembre.
Ah, 12 décembre, oui, c'est pas confirmé. 12 décembre.
On aura le troisième le 12 décembre.
Moi, j'en ai marre d'étudier. Il y a beaucoup de choses à faire. Les stages, littérature, non, civilisation trop aussi.
Les civilisations, tu as laquelle, toi, madame?
Les documents, il y a beaucoup de documents pour lire. 12 décembre?
Oui, je crois que oui.
12 décembre.
Alright, let's get started again. So we'll spend the rest of our time together today studying this poem. Well, you will spend the rest of your time today studying this poem. We're back to a topic about Aboriginal people. This is also an early poem that was published in 1946. Okay, so it was published in the same collection as Bordering. You'll see that there are a lot of common points in the type of tone, in the type of writing that you have. Niggers Leap in New England. New England is an area in New South Wales. Pour rappeler, New South Wales, c'est un des États de l'Australie. C'est dur à faire avec le Victoria, c'est à peu près ça, d'accord? Donc c'est l'état où vous avez Sydney. This is basically where you remember that Judith Wright was born towards the northeast of New South Wales. So New England is an area, basically today there's the New England National Park that is located within New England. Now, Niggers Leap is a name that exists for another, well, there are two names that exist for a location, Darky Point and Niggers Leap. As you can see from it, the names that are given to this location, something unpleasant took place. There's no written trace of this. This is a story that Wright got from her father, but there are examples that we have from other areas in Australia where this type of event took place. Niggers Leap, New England, or Darky Point, is basically a location where you've got a cliff, and where, according to the story that Wright's father told her, where a group of Aborigines who were suspected of having killed cattle, so killed cows, killed sheep, were actually pushed off the cliff. Okay, so were forced to jump off the cliff and obviously died in this. This is something that existed on the frontier in extremely violent events. This was a way of rounding up Aborigines on cliffs and then forcing them to basically jump off the cliff. Okay, so this is a lovely story, a lovely background to this poem. Ça va? No? Alright, so what I'm going to ask you to do is to read it. Then I just want to make sure that we read the first stanza together so you guys understand what the first stanza is about. And then I'll ask you to work in groups on different points. Okay, so take 5 minutes to read it. You'll see it's much more dense, much more cryptic than bore a ring. So have a read and we'll look at the first stanza together.
Il y en a qui arrivent à lire en rigolant et en parlant. It's very impressive, but it's very annoying. You're in liturgy.
Did you all have the time to read it? Not necessarily understand it, but read it. This word here, of course, when you work on it in groups, you can look up words if you need to. Kolomon refers to a dish used to carry usually fruit or food. It's an indigenous word. Okay, so this, of course, is a reference to Aboriginal people, Kolomon. Now, I just want to make sure that we understand the first stanza together, and then you guys can get working. I'm not sure how much you understand. You can see that the language is much more elaborate, sophisticated, much more elusive as well than it is Fubo-Ring. You can see that this section here, the first 4 lines, are actually a description of the landscape. They're pretty much a description of the cliff. Okay, so here are the spurs, I wrote it there. C'est pas les éperons, hein, ça marche pas. Here, the meaning of spurs is going to be basically the top of the cliff. Okay, so around that place you basically had 2 cliffs facing each other. So you can see here that you've got a description of the cliffs, okay, through the spurs, and you've got the idea, what is described in those first lines, I'm not sure if you understood it, is the coming of the night. Okay, so here you've got the eastward spurs. Donc vous avez l'idée que vous avez les crêtes qui sont le plus à l'est, qui tip backwards, d'accord, qui font comme, enfin qui se déplacent par rapport au soleil, c'est-à-dire qu'en fait vous avez l'ombre de la nuit qui arrive, d'accord, comme vous pourriez avoir par exemple l'ombre d'une montagne qui se projette et puis qui se déforme avec la nuit qui arrive. Night runs an obscure tide round Cape and Bay, so you've got the idea that the tide arrives with the night. And here this is a reference to the waves. Okay, you've got boats of cloud up from the sea, so obviously you've got the waves coming, potentially a lot of the, the clouds that are created by the bashing of the waves against the bottom of the cliff. And then here you can see a description of the cliff, the sheer and linelit granite head. Okay, so this first section basically describes that. You can see that here we got an address that is very similar to what we had in Australia in 1970, an address to the lonely air, which is very, romantic, in a way, very much part of romantic literature. And you can see that here she's asking the air to make a quilt. C'est quoi un quilt? C'est comme une couette, d'accord? So make a quilt. So cover up, basically nurture, if you want, the bone and skull of the Aborigines that fell from that cliff. Okay, this is pretty much what you have. So you've got the idea that basically night and the tide envelops those bodies and basically in a way protects them or covers them. Okay, this is very much what you have here. And then those 2 lines, I guess you understood this, are a description of the fall. Okay, you've got the idea that they screamed falling in flesh, so that when they were falling they were alive. And then when they fell, they were silent and obviously dead bodies. What a lovely image. So there you are. Ça va à peu près? So, I'm going to ask you to work with whoever you want. Try not to work by yourself. The idea is to really discuss. You can see that this is a pretty thick poem. Okay, it's pretty dense. What I want you to do is to work on 2 things. The first one is to work on the themes that are present in this. Les numéros, c'est les numéros qu'il y a dans le tableau. C'est pas plus important que ça. The second thing that I'm asking you to work on is to work on figures of speech and rhetoric. So try to find the themes that are there, maybe if you can find oppositions or connections, whatever you can find in this poem, and then try to have a look at the figures of speech, the language, the rhetoric. Okay, so these final sections in there. What I want in particular you guys to analyze, parmi d'autres choses, is the symbolism of the night and the symbolism of the tide. Okay, you need to think about why you've got this image of the night, why you've got the tide that is present in this poem. Alright? Eh bien, on se laisse un quart d'heure. Travailler ensemble, vous êtes libre de parler, d'aller regarder des choses, tout ça, de regarder. Essayez d'analyser le plus possible, de décomposer. Aidez-vous aussi, si vous n'avez rien compris au poème, à le comprendre à plusieurs. Ok? N'hésitez pas à vous retourner, Manon, vous allez travailler derrière.
What did you understand? Nothing.
Moi, je dois dire
What?
encore.
Okay. You want me to tell you what I understood?
Ok.
Not much. Not much.
Oui, Thames, c'est ça.
Thames.
Qu'est-ce que
Okay.
tu as compris à propos de...
Wait. Have another read first.
Yeah,
We'll have another read first.
yeah.
Okay? And try to note some
Yeah.
stuff, and then we can discuss it.
Mm.
Okay. So many words I don't understand.
Ah, moi aussi.
Terrible. It's a bit scary, really, when you think about it. Yes.
Everything is dark. Huh? The eastward
why
is
we talk
pressed
about
high backward from the sun. We can see here the sunset, and after that night surrounds an obscure tide.
Look, you have obscure. Okay. You have.
Pourquoi ici around Cape and Bay?
Where about?
Line 2.
Well, the Cape is there.
Ah oui, oui, c'est ici, ici, ici. Hein?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm-mm.
Then you have the
Oui,
bay.
ici, c'est ici. Ah oui, on a eastward, and the sun is here, and the sun is sunset, and the night runs, and after that the eastward.
The Cape is like this. When you have, for example, the coast is here, okay, and then you have here.
Mhm.
Okay, this is the cliff.
Oh wait.
This is the sea, okay,
Mhm.
and then go here and jump.
Mhm.
This is the cliff. So this is the Cape, and this is the bay. All this area here. Okay, so the night comes like it takes everything.
Yeah, already cover
Yes, yes,
everything.
yes.
And beats with the boats of cloud up from the sea, and after that boat strike the cliff,
Yes.
and the tide or cloud up from the sea. Cloud up, ça veut dire quoi?
Covers with cloud, I guess.
We become covered of cloud. Yeah.
So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 times the word night.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's important.
Mais ici, quoi? Granite? Non, night? Non, c'est pas ça. Je pensais qu'on doit prononcer granite. Non, granite.
Granite.
Granite. Swallow this Spin of range, be dark, oh lone air.
Have you tried this one to understand this part? This is a very
Quilt, il a dit quoi? Quilt, ah, cover up. The first part is about the craves and what happened in the environment, and after that, here is a symbol and climbing dark, a time for synthesis.
okay. I understood this one.
Sound for marine, sound for marine now must be measured our days by night, because we don't have any warning, because we don't have any symbol and this. So we have to recognize our past by night or our day by night.
This is the passage I don't understand. I don't understand this. I don't know what this is about. I understood this one. This one is alright.
Peut-être ici c'est principe au thème. Die, we do not know to dry channels and rivers. Okay, what did you understand?
It's a sort of warning, saying that it's like what goes around comes around. You know, you did this, you will have it. You will have it in your face, back in your face. You know, their blood is channeling our rivers.
Here, blood channel.
So their blood is in our rivers. So and the black dust, which is their black dust. It's on our crop, you know. A man is a man, let's say, and we should have known.
Mais ici c'est our crops, c'est dust of our crops. Ça veut dire dust of quelqu'un qui est mort, par exemple aborigène, les aborigènes. Parce que corpse.
No, it is not crops, it's
not crops. Oui.
It's not a body.
Ouais.
It's what you plant.
Crops, ouais. 8 was the dust.
Yes.
Oh, all men are one man at last.
Yeah.
All men are one man.
Yes. What they did to them, it's like doing it to themselves, you know. All men is one man. A man is a man. You know, if you did it to them, it's like doing it to your kind, you know, your fellow white man. So I guess this is a sort of warning stanza. It's you will pay at some point, in some extent. You will pay for what you've done. So
it's a cursed nature. It's a cursed nature, a cursed environment. Ici, par exemple, qu'est-ce que tu penses? Ici, par exemple, tank, c'est tank de tide. Parce que quand il rise up the cliffs and hit them c'est quoi ici?
the bodies.
The bodies. had the same question on its tongue for us. Tongue of tide.
There's no what this means, I think, we should have known that the night that tidying up the cliffs, so the night is covering the cliff, hiding what happened. You know, you have the dead bodies on the cliff, so the night sort of cover it and hide it.
Yeah.
But the night will have the same
Question on its
question
tongue.
on its tongue for
Oh,
you.
wait.
So it will come for you as well. Be careful, it might come for you as well. That's how I understand it. I don't understand poetry and I hate it.
Oh, c'est
I
trop
wish
difficile.
we could be on week 9, you know. This is not.
Ouais.
It's very difficult. And this is a really nice one. I read it. It's very nice. This one, there is one about. This one is really nice.
At Cedar,
About Cedar Creek. But this is. Kulala, it's very shit.
Koulala. Oh la la.
I don't know. But this is a very hard to understand.
Ouais.
It is difficult to understand. She said, here is the symbol. Symbol of what? What symbol?
Symbol of night. What is the symbol?
And the
Night
tide
and
is
tide.
covering things. So
Symbol of night, c'est quoi? And symbol of tide, c'est quoi?
and we didn't speak about the figures of speech. Figures of speech are
Here, ici.
I don't see it.
Figures of speech and rhetoric. Phonic or graphic figures.
There is none. Well, I can't see any
Repetition of vowels.
assonance or alliteration. I think
Alliterations.
there are none.
Repetition of consonants.
There are none. And then what?
Syntactic figures. Omission of conjunction and as implicit aesthetics often create an impression of disorders. Chaos. Speed of the rhythm of passage. C'est trop difficile. Hein. Hyperbaton.
But I guess these things, they did all these things. The figures of speech and rhetoric in L2 and L1, in licence, you know, they started doing it in literature,
Okay.
I think. So
Oui,
for
c'est
us
pour
it's
ça,
quite
oui,
new,
oui.
but I guess
Oui,
for
c'est
them
pour
it's
ça.
not that new.
Oui, c'est pour ça que j'ai demandé à quelqu'un que ouais, littérature c'est difficile pour moi. Elle a dit oh non, j'aime bien. J'ai convaincu.
It can be worse. I think, because I was talking yesterday with the Morocco guy, the guy from Morocco, you know. who's-
Ouais, ouais, Sharaf.
Yeah.
Hein?
And I was talking to him, and he has the other literature.
With Monsieur Pierre.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
yes. And he says, well, it is difficult because you don't know what to do. He gives you text, and
We know a lot of things, but I don't know what kind of things or information we have to write, but they don't know what kind of information we write.
it's very clear, I would say. Text are difficult, but it's clear. You know, she gives you this, and that's what you have to do. It's very clear. That's what you have to talk about in the commentary, and they have no idea.
Ouais.
They have no idea.
Oui, j'ai entendu que la prof te donne 10 parce que
She has no idea, and no one has actually. Just say whatever you want, and you'll have a 10.
Oui, j'ai entendu qu'il parle tout le temps à propos de sexe.
Yeah.
Et il répète avec different phrases.
But what about civilization? You have it with Madame
Schmidt.
and I have the other one. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of, but I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I like it.
History.
For us, it's about America and about slavery.
Really?
It's very interesting, but we have a lot of things to read.
Yeah, as like us.
And you know, we have to read the text, and then in class, he discussed about the text and about our point of view and what we did. So you need to read all the text for the next lesson. And we had a book to read as well.
Book to read?
Yeah.
Alright.
So it's. Did you have a book to read in Civilization?
No, we have lots of documents.
Okay, but no books.
No,
Wow.
unfortunately.
We have one. And we have a movie to watch.
Oh.
Yeah. It's nice. I think it's
Yeah,
very nice.
it's so nice history. It's so interesting. But when you have lots of time to understand, you have to go to profoundly.
Yes, I understand. You need to have time. And
Yeah.
I realize that I don't have enough time because I'm working.
Yeah,
And,
me too.
It's very difficult. You know, last week I was on. It was after I was on holiday at school, so I came to uni, but just uni. You know, I didn't have another work because I was on holiday. It was very pleasant to be just a student. You know, you don't work. You're just
And
a
you
student.
don't have anything else.
Yeah, you're just a student, so you can have time to write, to read your poetry, blah blah blah.
Like the other students, they do it this way
That's true. So I don't
because they
understand why
don't have any responsibilities for anything.
and I don't know why they don't have amazing marks, you know, because they just have this to do.
I understand, yeah.
And if you have time, it's not that complicated. You
And
know?
they are because they are getting used to this information. When for me, after 6 years, I studied English and French at the same time, so it just is so hard for me. And and I work beside studying. I don't have any chance. I don't have any option.
Yeah, that's true. We either have to work.
But anyone understand?
But it's fine. I think we're fine. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think we'll be fine. You didn't come yesterday.
No, because I thought because I thought it doesn't work for me, man, right now. Because right now I have to work with the basics or civilization or something. I have to pass the exam. I cannot work for all of the lessons, you know, traduction, grammaire,
Yeah, you need
n'importe
to
quoi.
have a choice.
Yeah,
Choice.
yeah.
Yes, makes sense.
I have to concentrate on literature because literature and civilization are so hard to understand, and you have to take a lot of time for understanding and for give your idea and point of view.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So you're concentrating on what?
Civilization, literature, didactique et autres didactiques.
Des langues, oui.
Parce qu'on a 3 didactiques. Didactique anglais, didactique A, didactique B à propos de sociolinguistique et sociolinguistique à propos de quelque chose. Du coup, 3 cours de didactique et civilisation et littérature et aussi disciplinaire. Perspective disciplinaire. But I'm not sure I can do that.
All right, let's have a look. So, what do you guys have? What are some of the things that... What are some of the things that you found or that you found problematic? we can talk about anything that you basically noticed as part of this. What did you discuss? Or what did you find problematic?
Actually, the fact that there's kind of a lot of things. There's the night, there's the water, there's mineral, there's time, which is quite actually you don't really when you read the poem you just go read the different ways and when it wants to take you but about it it's quite going one way then the other then talking about this, that and
Yep, definitely a lot of different things. As you said, you could mention time, history, there's a lot about navigating as well, about the symbolism of the sea. I can't remember what else you mentioned, but we've got lots of different things that are present there. We'll also have the crops, we've got the rivers, so we've got the natural landscape, we'll also have this. So as you said, there are quite a lot of things. This is particularly dense. This is why we do it together. Don't worry, the other poems are more straightforward. All right. What else did you find or not find? Let's do a little brainstorm. What's associated with the night?
Darkness.
Okay, so we've got darkness.
You mean in the poem, right?
Yeah. Not in life. Otherwise, you might need a couple of hours.
She mentioned it 5 times.
Yeah.
The word night itself.
Okay, so darkness. Yeah.
Obscure.
Yeah, the tide.
Suffering.
Yeah, suffering.
the body's dust.
Huh?
The body's dust.
Oh, the bodies, the dead bodies.
The,
What
hide,
else?
the hiding.
Yeah, hiding. What else? Oh, you don't have to write this. C'est pour qu'on arrive à le récupérer. What else is associated with night? Think?
Silence.
Silence? Yeah, okay, sorry.
Also the sea, the last sentence.
Yeah, the sea. History. All right. So you can see that the night is associated with lots of things. It's a really polysemous word, a really polysemous symbol in this. This is what makes the poem really obscure. Jokes aside, it really makes the poem difficult to grasp because the night works as a really, multifaceted symbol. It represents lots of things. You can see at the beginning that the night is. We also have this idea of protection in connection to the dead bodies. The night actually protects the bodies, but it also hides those bodies. Okay, so you can see that the night and the coming tide are there to cover up the bodies. You know that ça va être dégueu. If bodies are basically covered up by water, the decomposition happens faster. Okay, so in a way, the night helps the work of the settlers. Driving Aborigines over a cliff is a way of getting rid of them, but it's also a way of hiding those bodies, of getting rid of those bodies. So you can see that the night participates in this. Through the darkness, through the silence, through the tide, you've got this idea that the bodies are disappearing. Yet the other idea that you have in the poem, I'm guessing that you saw this, is the fact that the night reveals as well these bodies, and it reveals the sufferings. You can see this in lots of different spots. On est ici. So you can see on line 20, she says, we should have known the night that tidied up the cliffs. Okay, so you've got this one idea that the night basically hides the bodies, it helps them decompose, it helps them disappear. And hid them had the same question on its tongue for us. Okay, so the idea that even though the night hides this, the night is a time of reflection. If you guys have anxious problems, you know that generally you think about them during the night. You wake up, you can't go back to sleep. Okay, so you've got this idea that the night is also a time when all of these problems are being raised. And this is what the second stanza tells you. Climbing dark, so the night is a time for synthesis, so a time for reflection. What's with the this? How do you guys understand this? What is being said about the night here? We've got references to the sea here and an association with the sea. What does night represent for the mariners, for the people that are going to be aboard a ship?
It's dangerous.
Yeah, pretty much. It represents danger. Okay, so you've got this idea of night protecting, hiding the bodies. On the other hand, the night is a danger for the mariners. Si on traduit assez littéralement, the keels, c'est les quilles des bateaux. Vous savez que quand vous naviguez, un endroit qui est dangereux, c'est de se planter la quille du bateau, enfin de casser la quille du bateau sur des rochers. Donc vous pouvez voir night boys no warning over the rocks that wait our keels. C'est-à-dire la nuit, en gros, on ne voit pas les rochers sur lesquels on peut fracasser un bateau. Donc la nuit, c'est dangereux. D'accord? Traduction littérale. Traduction simpliste du poème. No bells sound for the mariners. Same thing, same idea that there's no warning for the mariners at night because you can't see as much. So you can see what she says is this: now must we measure our day by nights, our tropics by their poles, love by its end, and all our speech by silence. So you can see this idea that to her night hides, but it also reveals those problems. It's a moment of danger, it's a moment where the truth actually comes out, where you've got this idea that history is revealed in the night. So you can see how this works really ambiguously, and I think this is what makes the poem difficult to read, because you never know which side of the night she's evoking, basically. But you can see basically that she's trying to show in this moment the idea that they must measure their days by nights, their tropics by their poles, etc. What she's hinting at is the interconnection between settlers and that deed. The fact that you can never get rid of it, you can silence it, you can try to hide it through the tide, you can get rid of the bodies, but this actually remains. You can see this in particular in these lines. Did we not know their blood channeled our rivers? Donc their, des aborigènes, our, des colons. And the black dust our crops ate was their dust. You can see here the connection that she makes. A dead body is not something that just disappears. A dead body and the presence of Aborigines, who are deeply connected to the landscape, is something that remains. You can't erase Aborigines from the Australian landscape. So what she's saying is that there's an interconnection between their fates. That basically their rivers are fed by their blood. Whatever murders you've done, okay, this is an image, of course, runs. Their blood is going to run in the rivers that you're going to use. That is basically nature is forever tainted by any act of violence. Okay? Any act of violence you do is an act of violence that is going to be present in the landscape that you then want to use. Any crop that you build on top of bodies that you're able to do because you've killed Aborigines or driven them over a cliff is a crop that is going to be tainted, that is based on their bodies. Okay, this is pretty much what she says there. So you can see that what she's suggesting is that at this time of night you've got history asking that question, history revealing the bodies as well, asking the questions again and again and again. Okay, so a moment to think, a moment of danger, a moment when all of this comes back to the surface. Ça va? you can see again at the very end there, she says, night floods us as suddenly as history that has sunk many islands in its good time. So you can see again the comparison between night and history. So in a way, the rising night to her is history, the inevitability of the justice that is contained within history. This is what she assumes in this, that history is necessarily going to reveal those murders, is going to show that this whole settler society is based on those murders. So she considers that night functions like history, that history keeps coming back. Parce que c'est quoi la caractéristique numéro 1 de la nuit et de la marée? C'est que ce sont des phénomènes naturels récurrents que vous ne pouvez pas éviter. D'accord? C'est récurrent, ça revient sans cesse, sans cesse, sans cesse. Donc on va dire, quelque part, c'est un petit peu une image de la culpabilité. D'accord? C'est la culpabilité qui revient quand la nuit, d'accord? Qui revient la nuit, qui vous envahit, qui vous immonde, qui peut faire tomber des sociétés. D'accord? C'est ce que vous voyez à la fin ici. Ça va? Alright. Yes. Je réfléchis une petite seconde. Okay. We had to do this rather quickly. I don't think that's a fire alarm. I'm not sure. Anyways, we had to do this very quickly. We might, if there are lines that you find that you still have trouble understanding, we'll talk about them next week. Okay? I want you guys to feel that you've understood this poem, even though it is based on elusiveness. Okay? That's the nature of this poem, that it is there to allude to things, and some of the lines are actually quite difficult to understand and to resolve. Alors, vos petits devoirs, et je vous laisse vous enfuir car c'est bien l'heure. Ce que je vous demande de faire pour la semaine prochaine, on va commencer à réfléchir plus en détail, c'est de lire le document 17. Read document 17 and obviously think about, underline the main points. Try to see what Sue King-Smith argues in her essay on Judith Wright's poetry. All right, see you next week.